Chapter 4. Zechariah chapter 4, our continued study of the minor prophets. You might ask yourself, how in the world did he cover 3 chapters in one class? But we talked Wednesday night about the fact that Zechariah is hard, right? It's one of the hardest of all the prophetic books to try to grasp and understand. And so it can be challenging because of that. It can be difficult for us to understand exactly what he's driving at. And anytime you get into a narrative like that, my general rule of thumb is if you can find the simplest portions of it and make sure that whatever you conclude about anything else, it doesn't override that. In other words, if we've got a clear definition, we're talking about Zerubbabel, or we're talking about Joshua, or we're talking about something that's happening in that moment, and we can very clearly define it, then just make sure that whatever we conclude or whatever we draw an understanding of from the more complicated texts doesn't override what we can simply understand from those other ones. I think in some ways it's the same way you approach the book of Revelation. When you approach the book of Revelation, you have some simplistic statements like, these things shall soon come to pass. And so when you understand there's simplistic statements like that made, it at least frames for you a little bit about at least how far you should be willing to go in your understanding of a narrative. So that's been kind of our approach. And because of that, we've been moving somewhat swiftly through the specific details because they're really the same message. I believe chapters 1 through 8 of the book of Zechariah are just, in many senses, a mimic of what Haggai said. What Haggai said was we need to do what? Get to work on the temple, right? We've got to get the temple built. If you recall, in these folks that are coming back out of captivity, this initial wave that comes, their focus is get religious, or at least should have been, and they've been wasting 16 years, but let's get the temple built and let's get our religious connection, our worship back to Jehovah going in the right way. Then He'll be with us and He'll aid us and He'll help us. Later, men like Ezra and then ultimately Nehemiah come back. They're basically nation builders. Their intent is to come back once the initial work had been done, reestablishment of the temple, get the worship to God back in line. Ezra and Nehemiah's time comes along. They arrive on the scene. Latter half of the book of Zechariah, then they begin to nation build. They begin to reestablish the people. And so that's kind of the historical backdrop to these. And so first half of Zechariah, kind of contemporary, talks a lot about what's happening and encouraging the people to get the temple built like Haggai. Last half of the book has lots and lots of messianic references to the coming of Jesus. And we'll note those when we get to them when we move forward through the book. But basically, he's been having a series of what? Series of visions, right? He's been having a series of visions, one right after another. And he's been communicating predominantly with an angel. Okay, so verse 1 of chapter 4 is we get back into this narrative. Says that, and the angel that talked with me came again and waked me as a man that is wakened out of his sleep. So, what's that like? Say it again, Brian. Okay. Well, and I thought you could see it that way. I kind of, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I kind of had, right? You know, I'm dead asleep. And I'm out and the phone rings, right? And you know that feeling, right? When the phone rings in the middle of the night and what that every impulse and every ounce of your nerve endings go flying. Yeah, your stars. Okay, so I mean I'm wrong, but that's what I see here. You're asleep and I'm awakened out of that. And so if you could just envision here for a moment, so Zechariah is awakened out of his sleep, whether he's, and I agree with Brian, it could mean that as well, that he just kind of, he wakes up, he's groggy. But anyway, the very first question is what? What do you see? I don't know about you, but when I'm woke up, either way, by the way, excitedly or just waking up, I don't see see anything, right? I don't see much of anything. And the very first thing he's asked when he's awakened out of his sleep by this vision and this angel, what do you see? And so I said, I have looked, and behold, a candlestick, all of gold, with a bowl upon the top of it, and his 7 lamps thereon, and 7 pipes to the 7 lamps, which are upon the top thereof. Now, that sounds a lot like the book of Revelation. That, from a prophetic standpoint, this imagery of a candlestick. We kind of know in Revelation, though, when it's used there, that there were 7 because there were seven churches of Asia. We kind of get that defined for us in the book of Revelation. He doesn't quite have that benefit here. He doesn't quite have the benefit of this very specific kind of notation of what this candlestick really is. But he sees a candlestick of gold, a single candlestick, all of gold. It's got a bowl on top of it. But there's 7 what? 7 lamps thereon, and 7 pipes to the 7 lamps, which are upon the top thereof. So you've got a candlestick, bowl, 7 lights or stems going off of that single candlestick. 7 generally just simply means perfect or complete, right? Something like that. And so the only challenge maybe in this would be to me is this right here. His. Who's the his? And I said, I have looked, and behold, a candlestick all of gold with a bowl on top of it, and his 7 lamps thereon, and 7 pipes to the 7 lamps which are upon the top thereof. Now, if translators, and that's King James in front of you there on the screen, if the translators are accurate, they've concluded that it's not whom? It's not God. And why would you say that? Because it's not capitalized. And so the translators, at least of the King James. Now, my question is, who else has got something other than King James in your hand?
Your King James don't have that word his.
Doesn't have the word his. Okay. Anybody else got a variation? Anybody else got anything? Everybody else got his? And does anybody have it capitalized? All right. And I'm just asking because let's work through it a little bit. So I think we could argue that we're probably not talking about God. It doesn't seem like any translator or scholar wants to lean that way, because none of them want to attribute with a capital H here that we're looking towards Jehovah. It's. Okay. So it's 7. So I concur with that, by the way. I don't think we're talking about a person. And his, I think the his, and you'll see that sometimes. Well, you'll see a personal pronoun like that used in relationship to personify, if you will, the candlestick. His. These 7 lamps and 7 pipes and the bowl, they all belong to the candlestick. And I think that's probably what he's trying to say here. That these are the things that are connected to the candlestick, and not necessarily give ownership of that candlestick to some particular person. Now, again, that's just my conclusion. I don't know that there's enough evidence in the text to be able to really give us a much clear definition of that. We can maybe rule out God if we trust the translators in relationship to how those that use the word his, how they did that. But I don't know.
Well, if they take the word out, it's not italicized.
Yeah.
Any words that are italicized were actually, added to translators for clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a definite word there, and I understand. Yeah, and I again would agree. But it is a Um,
A lot in the King James, there's a lot of masculine articles in there.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Sometimes some of these new versions I'd be careful with because it turns to gender neutral. That's another topic, but
right.
but yeah, it becomes well, not necessarily in this case, but it becomes
Right.
feminist.
Yeah. It's an effort to neutralize all gender reference, and there are some translations of the Bible that do that. Don't just do it occasionally. Others do it intentionally and say that's what they're doing.
They just do King James version because they left it out because they didn't think of the person either.
Well, I can't speak for the translators, so I don't know why they did. You've got a single word that you've got to get ownership and the number out of the same word, and that's kind of where the difficulty I think lies in relationship to this. But be that as it may, and I probably spurred a thought. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you just went on through it and never gave it. Didn't bother you, so you didn't worry about it. But here's the imagery: candlestick. You got these perfect numbers, lampstands on top of lamps on there, pipes on there. 2 olive trees by it, one upon the right side of the bowl, and the other upon the left side thereof. Keep in mind the bowl's where? On top of the candlestick. Okay, so you can kind of visualize what we're seeing here. A little bit about what Zechariah was seeing. And so I answered. So he sees this vision or sees this image. And so I answered and spoke to the angel that talked with him, saying what? What are these? Has he said that before? Yes. So it's clear, and we used this by illustration on Wednesday. If we don't grasp these imageries and these visions, we're in good company. Because who else doesn't get them? The prophet. Okay? The prophet. Now, he's going to get some clarity when the angel responds and answers to his questions. But just by the visions themselves, he repeatedly says, what is that? What is that? What is that? What is that? He wasn't grasping what these visions meant within themselves. He was inquisitive practically every time he receives a vision. He makes some comment to the angel about helping him define or understand what it is that he just saw. And typically the angel then does what? The angel responds. Verse 5. Then the angel that talked with me answered and said unto me, Knowest thou not what these be? And he said, Nope, I don't have any idea. I don't understand these things. Then he answered and spoke unto me, saying, This is the word of the Lord unto Zerubbabel. Who's he? If we were going to give him a title, maybe governor might be a word we would use in relationship to him. Saying, Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. Who art thou, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel thou shalt become a plain. And he shall bring forth the headstone thereof with shoutings, crying, Grace, grace unto it. And so basically he's saying what about Zerubbabel? He has what? Yeah, he's got the authority, right? Yeah. So we're Lord's working behind Zerubbabel, Zechariah. Who needs to hear that, by the way? Not just Zechariah. Who needs to hear that? The people do, right? The people need to hear from somebody other than, in some senses, Zerubbabel. Right? Because Zerubbabel, if he hears go back to Haggai for a minute, think about this contemporary prophet, and their job is to go and they've got to convince Zerubbabel, and who else? Who's the other name that keeps surfacing? It'll come Joshua, right? And he's the what? He's the high priest. Okay? And so their names keep coming up. And they're the ones that Haggai go to and say, you need to get the people over there and finish that temple. And Zechariah is going to come and in the midst of that, and he's going to also remind them that they need to be listening to these two men. These are the two men that God has chosen. This is the purpose and focus that God has. This is the authority. Now, just think for a minute. Why a candlestick? Well, in book of Revelation, when he talks about and the candlestick, and these are these 7 churches. And he warns them, get your act together, or lest I come and do what with that? And remove the candlestick. And the imagery of that is he's removing who from the picture if he takes away their candlestick? Yeah, okay, so the authority that Jesus has been granting unto them and the work that he's been doing with them will be taken away. Zerubbabel is this image of the authority of God is with him. You need to listen to him. You need to pay attention to his instructions. You need to allow for him to guide and lead you into the purposes that I have for you. That, to me, seems to be the simplistic message thus far as it relates to what Zechariah is hearing. Moreover, verse 8, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, the hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this house. His hand shall also finish it. And thou shalt know that the Lord of hosts hath sent me unto you. And so he says, listen, I'm with Zerubbabel. I'm behind Zerubbabel. I'm strengthening him. And not only did he lay the foundation, but he's going to what? He's going to finish the task. Enough of this waiting around and building your own houses and paying attention to your own financial needs and all the things that you've been doing. This house was started. You've been delaying it. This needs to be done. And it will be done under the leadership of Zerubbabel within his life. For who hath despised the day of small things? For they shall rejoice and shall see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel with those 7. They are the eyes of the Lord which run to and fro through the whole earth. And so God's paying attention. He's aware. He's watching. And he says, though you may think this temple is small compared to the old one, I hope you rejoice when you see the plummet in the hand of Zerubbabel, when you see the implementation of the tools and craftsmen who are going to start rebuilding the temple again. Don't despise the day of small things. God's hand is behind this. God, I suppose there could be a temptation if you're sitting there looking at that temple, and it's pretty obvious. You don't have to see the whole structure to get an image of at least certain measurements of it. You can simply look at its foundation, right? You can look at the dimensions of the foundation and have a general idea how large this structure is going to be. And if that foundation is well within the original perimeter of the original temple, it's going to be pretty obvious that what we're building here is something far less than what we had prior. You don't have to have it completely built to understand that. You can just look at the foundation and grasp that concept. You've probably done that. You've driven by somebody who's doing some kind of construction project. Maybe you only saw the stakes that they drove in the ground, where the foundation is going to go. But you can visualize in your mind when you see where that perimeter of that foundation has been staked out, hasn't even been poured yet. But you can get a general idea about how big that structure is going to be. Now, you may not be able to judge the one dimension, which is height, or if they decide to dig really deep. But for the most part, you can get a pretty good idea what kind of structure you're dealing with. The temptation might be to see this small foundation and go, why bother? Why bother build that? It's not even going to be worthy to be compared to what we had before. And so he's got to fire them up. It's the day of rejoicing. When you see Zerubbabel out there leading the people building that temple, it's a day to rejoice, not to complain about how puny it is and how things were so much better 50 years ago or 70 years ago for them when before they went into captivity. They've got to recognize the benefit of this. Go ahead, Tom. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And they can't value the importance of what they're doing based on the size of that structure that they're. Yeah, yeah. My wife wants to live in a tiny home, so I'm trying to get adjusted to that idea. But you're right. That really matters. It's not about the size of the house. It's the importance of the purpose that it serves, and that's the point of this in particular. It's what's the purpose of this temple? Praise and worship God. That's why it's important. It doesn't matter whether it compares to Solomon's temple or not.
You always hear people say, "What do you want, quality or quantity?"
Yeah.
And well, my answer is, I say quantity.
Yeah. Yeah. You get a lot out of the quality. Yep. Yep. I get you. Yes. Go ahead, Randy. Yeah. 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 And that's hard sell. The temptation in life in general is to focus on everything that's bad. I mean, that's a heavy temptation. It's hard not to do. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Depends on, yeah. Right. I mean, we've got to make a decision how we want to view things, and how we want to what we want to focus on. Yeah. And that's what you're going to see his hands out there working. So then answered I and said unto him, verse 11, what are these two olive trees? So we've got, he kind of grasped the candlestick, lamps. So here's these two olive trees on each side, one on the right and one on the left. And I answered again and said unto him, what be these two olive branches, which through the golden pipes empty the golden oil out of themselves? And so he asked him, and then it seems like he didn't get a answer, right? And so then I asked him again, asking the angel, what are these olive trees? And he answered me and said, knowest thou not what these be? And I said, no, it's here he goes again, right? I know, I wouldn't ask you if I understood. Then said he, these are the two anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. Now, generally, when we think of anointed and people, we generally think of one. We generally think of Jesus, the ultimate anointed one. But he is not the only one who had been anointed. The kings had been anointed. Others had been anointed for certain particular purposes. My general conclusion that this is probably who? Zerubbabel and Joshua. I agree with that. I could again. I'm not so persuaded in that I would have to make it that, but it seems to me that that's the point of the point of or thrust of his conversation here is the people needed to listen to Zerubbabel and Joshua so that the right things could happen in terms of getting this temple built. And so they are the ones appointed by Jehovah to make this happen. Go ahead, Brian.
Another place someone may consider is in Revelation. These are the two olive trees. It's speaking about the two witnesses. They're labeled as two olive trees.
Yeah.
And it says, I will challenge my witnesses, they shall prophesy 1,200 days, clothe the sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before God of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. The same imagery. My problem and challenge has been which one is helps define the other. You know what I mean? Which direction do you flow that? In one sense, do you use Revelation to help you understand Zechariah? Probably it's the other way around because of which came first. And so you would have a reference in Revelation that had a reference to Zechariah.